In today's video, I'm going to rank the top 10 most controversial events in history and give you both sides of the story. These events have sparked debates, arguments, and even wars among people, and they are still relevant and influential today. But before we dive into the list, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. And let me know in the comments below, what are some of the most controversial events in history that you think should be on this list and why? All right. Let's get started with number 10, the My Lai Massacre. 10. The My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, U.S. Army soldiers in Charlie Company killed as many as 567 South Vietnamese civilians, including women and children, in what became known as the My Lai Massacre. The soldiers were acting on orders to destroy the village, which was suspected of harboring Viet Cong fighters. When the public learned about the massacre in November 1969, it created a firestorm of controversy and outrage. The massacre and its aftermath were in part a reflection of a racist belief that shaped American policy in Vietnam, that, as William Westmoreland, the commanding general in Vietnam, infamously said, "Life is cheap in the Orient." Some argue that the My Lai massacre was an isolated incident, a tragic result of poor leadership, stress, and confusion in a brutal war. They point out that some soldiers refused to participate or tried to stop the killing, and that the military eventually prosecuted the perpetrators, although none were convicted. Others contend that the My Lai massacre was not an aberration but a symptom of a deeper problem in the American war effort. They claim that the massacre was enabled by a culture of violence, dehumanization, and impunity that pervaded the U.S. military in Vietnam, and that the investigation and trial were a cover-up to protect the higher-ups and the public image of the war. 9. The assassination of Julius Caesar. On March 15, 44 BC, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was stabbed to death by a group of senators led by his former friend and ally, Marcus Brutus. The assassins claimed that they were saving the Republic from tyranny, as Caesar had amassed too much power and threatened to become a king. However, their act of violence plunged Rome into a civil war that lasted for more than a decade and ended with the establishment of the imperial system that they had sought to prevent. Some view Caesar as a hero, a brilliant general and statesman who expanded the Roman territory, reformed the calendar, and granted citizenship and clemency to many of his enemies. They argue that Caesar was a benevolent dictator who had the best interests of Rome and its people at heart, and that his assassination was a betrayal and a crime. Others see Caesar as a villain, a ruthless and ambitious tyrant who violated the Constitution, oppressed the Senate, and waged wars of conquest and plunder. They argue that Caesar was a threat to the liberty and stability of Rome, and that his assassination was a patriotic and noble deed. 8. The Salem Witch Trials. Between June and September 1692, some 19 men and women were found guilty of witchcraft and executed in the small religious community of Salem, Massachusetts, in northeastern America. The trials were sparked by a group of young girls who claimed to be afflicted by the devil and accused several local residents of bewitching them. The hysteria spread quickly, and hundreds of people were arrested and interrogated, often under torture or threat of death. The trials were eventually stopped by the intervention of the governor of Massachusetts, who denounced the use of spectral evidence and pardoned the remaining accused. Some explain the Salem witch trials as a result of mass hysteria fueled by religious fanaticism, social tensions, and personal vendettas. They suggest that the accusers were either lying, delusional, or manipulated by others, and that the accused were innocent victims of a witch hunt. Others interpret the Salem witch trials as a reflection of the gender and power dynamics of the time, as most of the accusers were young, unmarried women, and most of the accused were older, married women who defied the norms of Puritan society. They suggest that the accusers were expressing their discontent and frustration, and that the accused were scapegoats for the problems and fears of the community. 7. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing an estimated 200,000 people and injuring many more. The bombings were the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare, and they marked the end of World War II in the Pacific. The bombings also ushered in the nuclear age, which has shaped the geopolitics, science, and culture of the world ever since. Some justify the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a necessary and humane act, which saved millions of lives by avoiding a prolonged and bloody invasion of Japan. They argue that the bombings were the only way to force Japan to surrender unconditionally, and that they demonstrated the power and resolve of the United States to its allies and enemies. Others condemn the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a barbaric and immoral act, which violated the laws of war and the principles of humanity. They argue that the bombings were unnecessary and ineffective, as Japan was already on the verge of collapse, and that they caused immense and indiscriminate suffering and destruction to innocent civilians. 6. The French Revolution. From 1789 to 1799, France underwent a radical transformation from an absolute monarchy to a republic and then to a dictatorship. The French Revolution was sparked by the series of political, economic, and social crises that eroded the legitimacy and authority of the king and the nobility. The revolutionaries, inspired by the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, challenged the old order and sought to create a new one. The revolution was marked by violent events such as the storming of the Bastille, the execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the Reign of Terror, and the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Some celebrate the French Revolution as a landmark event in the history of democracy, human rights, and nationalism. They praise the revolutionaries for overthrowing a corrupt and oppressive regime and for establishing the principles and institutions that shaped the modern world. Others criticize the French Revolution as a disaster that unleashed chaos, violence, and tyranny. They blame the revolutionaries for destroying a stable and prosperous society and for creating a legacy of extremism, terror, and war. The American Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, the United States was torn apart by a civil war that pitted the northern states, known as the Union, against the southern states, known as the Confederacy. The main cause of the war was the issue of slavery, which the southern states wanted to preserve and expand, and the northern states wanted to limit and abolish. The war was the deadliest in American history, claiming more than 600,000 lives and leaving millions more wounded and displaced. The war also resulted in the emancipation of 4 million enslaved African Americans, the preservation of the United States as a single nation, and the transformation of the political, economic, and social landscape of the country. Some regard the American Civil War as a noble and heroic struggle, in which the Union fought to preserve the nation and end slavery, and the Confederacy fought to defend its rights and way of life. They honor the courage and sacrifice of the soldiers and leaders on both sides, and the achievements and contributions of the African Americans who fought for their freedom. Others view the American Civil War as a tragic and avoidable conflict, in which the Union waged a war of aggression and coercion, and the Confederacy fought for a cause that was immoral and doomed. They lament the loss and suffering of the people and the regions involved, and the problems and challenges that the war created or left unresolved. 4. The Crusades. From the 11th to the 13th centuries, a series of religious wars were fought between the Christian and Muslim worlds, mainly over the control of the Holy Land. The Crusades were launched by the popes and the European nobility, who called for a holy war against the infidels and promised spiritual and material rewards for the crusaders. The Crusades involved thousands of knights, soldiers, and pilgrims who traveled across Europe and Asia and fought in numerous battles and sieges such as the capture of Jerusalem, the massacre of Antioch, and the sack of Constantinople. The Crusades also had a lasting impact on the relations between the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities and on the culture, trade, and politics of the medieval world. Some defend the Crusades as a justified and necessary response to the Muslim aggression and expansion, which threatened the Christian lands and pilgrims. They commend the Crusaders for their faith and devotion, and for their achievements and discoveries in the East. Others denounce the Crusades as a misguided and destructive enterprise, which exploited the religious fervor and ignorance of the masses. They condemn the Crusaders for their greed and violence, and for their atrocities and crimes against the Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians. 3. The Holocaust. From 1933 to 1945, Nazi Germany and its allies systematically persecuted and killed about 6 million Jews, as well as millions of other people deemed racially inferior or politically undesirable, such as Roma, Slavs, communists, and homosexuals. The Holocaust was the culmination of a long history of anti-Semitism and racism in Europe and a core element of the Nazi ideology and policy. The Holocaust was carried out by various means, such as ghettos, concentration camps, death camps, mass shootings, and mobile killing units. The Holocaust was also facilitated by the collaboration or complicity of many individuals, organizations, and countries, and by the indifference or ignorance of many others. Some assert that the Holocaust was a unique and unprecedented event in human history, which defies comparison and comprehension. They argue that the Holocaust was motivated by a radical and irrational hatred of the Jews, who were seen as the absolute enemy and the source of all evil. They also claim that the Holocaust was executed by a highly organized and efficient bureaucracy, which aimed at the total annihilation of the Jewish people and culture. Others challenge the uniqueness of the Holocaust and place it in a broader historical and comparative context. They argue that the Holocaust was not an isolated phenomenon, but a product of modernity, nationalism, colonialism, and genocide. They also point out that the Holocaust was not the only or the worst case of mass violence and oppression in the 20th century, and that other groups and regions have suffered similar or worse fates. 2. The Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange was the widespread transfer of plants, animals, people, diseases, and cultures between the Americas and the Old World, following the voyages of Christopher Columbus and other European explorers in the late 15th and 16th centuries. The Columbian Exchange had profound and lasting effects on the ecology, economy, demography, and history of both continents. The Columbian Exchange introduced new crops, such as potatoes, maize, tomatoes, and chocolate, which increased food production and population growth in Europe and Asia. The Columbian Exchange also brought new animals, such as horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep, which transformed the landscape and lifestyle of the Americas. The Columbian Exchange also facilitated the transatlantic slave trade, which transported millions of Africans to the Americas, where they labored in plantations, mines, and factories. The Columbian Exchange also unleashed a devastating wave of diseases, such as smallpox, measles, and malaria, which decimated the indigenous populations of the Americas, who had no immunity to them. Some praise the Columbian Exchange as a positive and beneficial process, which enriched the diversity and prosperity of the world. They emphasize the cultural and scientific exchanges that took place between the different civilizations, and the innovations and discoveries that resulted from them. They also highlight the contributions and achievements of the people who crossed the oceans and the opportunities and challenges that they faced. Others criticize the Columbian Exchange as a negative and harmful process, which exploited and oppressed the people and the environment of the Americas. They stress the violence and injustice that accompanied the European conquest and colonization, and the resistance and survival of the indigenous and African peoples. They also expose the ecological and social impacts of the Columbian Exchange, such as the loss of biodiversity, the spread of invasive species, and the creation of racial and class inequalities. 1. The Big Bang. The Big Bang is the scientific theory that explains the origin and evolution of the universe. According to the Big Bang theory, the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago, when a tiny, dense, and hot point of matter and energy exploded and expanded rapidly. The Big Bang theory is based on various observations and measurements, such as the cosmic microwave background radiation, the redshift of distant galaxies, and the abundance of light elements. The Big Bang theory also predicts various phenomena, such as the formation of stars, planets, galaxies, and black holes, and the fate of the universe. The Big Bang theory is widely accepted by the scientific community, but it also raises many questions and challenges, such as the nature of the initial singularity, the origin of matter and energy, the existence of dark matter and dark energy, and the possibility of multiverse. Some accept the Big Bang theory as a valid and reliable explanation of the cosmic reality, which is compatible with reason and faith. They argue that the Big Bang theory is supported by empirical evidence and logical inference, and that it does not contradict the existence of a creator or a purpose for the universe. They also appreciate the beauty and wonder of the Big Bang theory and the curiosity and creativity that it inspires. Others reject the Big Bang theory as a flawed and arbitrary speculation of the human mind, which is incompatible with revelation and tradition. They argue that the Big Bang theory is based on assumptions and interpretations, and that it contradicts the teachings of the scriptures and the authorities. They also denounce the Big Bang theory as a threat and a challenge to the moral and spiritual values of humanity and the dignity and destiny of the universe. And that's it for my top 10 most controversial events in history. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new and interesting. Remember, this is not a definitive or objective list, but rather my personal opinion based on some web search results. You may agree or disagree with my choices, and that's totally fine. The purpose of this video is not to tell you what to think, but to encourage you to think critically and independently, and to respect different perspectives and viewpoints. History is not black and white, but full of shades of gray, and that's what makes it so fascinating and controversial. So what do you think of this list? Do you agree or disagree with my ranking? What are some of the other controversial events in history that you would add or remove from this list, and why? Let me know in the comments below, and let's have a civil and constructive discussion. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.